Well, this is a very difficult case to talk about altogether, simply because it's so elaborate, there's so much to it. It all really started, I'll just check my dates to be exact, on Saturday the 8th of February 1986. I was sat in the evening with my wife watching the television when the phone went. I went to the phone and answered it, and it was a man called Peter Trinder on the other end, who said he'd been given my name by a ufologist. Obviously somebody knows I'm into UFOs, and that he was to call me, and this person had given him my telephone number. So I said, yes, well, what's it all about then? And then Peter started on this fantastic story, if you will, that a friend of his had bought a cottage down the road from him in Dodleston, and that ever since he'd been in there, weird things were happening, strange things, poltergeist-like activities and the like, and that they'd also been receiving messages from somebody claiming to be in the past. I mean, it all sounds absolutely fantastical, and I'm sure you understand that what I was thinking at the time is this has got to be some kind of elaborate hoax, or somebody taking the mick, having a go. They thought, yes, he's into UFOs, we'll have a go at conning him along. So the person said, we'd like to come down and talk to you. So I thought, well, it's bad enough having loonies nearby, but having them in the house I can do without. So I said, no, I'll come and visit you. To my surprise, they agreed straight away. So the very next day, my wife and I drive all the way from here to Harden, which is on the border between England and Wales, near Chester, and we turn up at this gentleman's house. His name was Peter Trinder, and his lovely wife Valerie. And they make us home and they make us a cup of tea, and we're waiting apparently for somebody else to come, and the somebody else that was to come was a Ken Webster and his girlfriend Debbie, who had bought a cottage in Dodleston and were having all these unusual things happen. Well, the door opened and in they came, and straight away everybody was questioning me as if I was some sort of guilty party. Possibly they might be thinking I'm responsible for what's going on. So the conversation carried on, and then Peter said, we've had all these messages. I said, well, where are they? So he goes to one corner and he brings out a cardboard box, and it's full to the top, with A4 pieces of paper with the most elaborate and some would say beautiful hand script on it. And I said, these are the messages? He said, yes. I said, well, what's special about them? And he said, they're from somebody living in the 1500s. I said, what? Somebody living in the 1500s sending messages now? Yes. It's turning up on paper and on a computer. Well, by then I think I'd just about had enough. I thought, well, I don't know what they think I am, but I'm not as daft obviously as they think I am.
Well, this cardboard box, you've recreated that for us today, haven't you?
That's correct.
Which is what it looks like.
It's almost the same size and everything, and it was full of this script. So the evening went on, and I said, they asked me would I agree to investigate this. So I said, yes, I'll agree to investigate. Now in my mind I'm thinking, this is a nonsense, it's a hoax, but I'll go along with it because I'm an investigator and it'll help me to tune my investigation. I'll prove it's a hoax, and then I'll have it out with them face to face and show them that it wasn't me that was being silly, it was them. So I said, right, well, I only investigate on one very simple condition, that I have total control of it. So if I'm going to do anything at all, I want all of the writing that you claim you've had, and I want to take it away with me so that I can analyse it. And then if you want me to investigate some cottage, I will want the key to it. I want it to be entirely at my disposal. I want it to be empty. And I want to be able to do what I want. Do you agree? Well, could blow me down. They did. Said yes, by all means, and we made arrangements for me to come and investigate the cottage. Now, the names of these people, and we'll get them absolutely right, Kenneth Roy Webster, who owned the cottage, Peter William Trinder, Valerie Trinder, his wife, and Deborah Oakes, who was Ken Webster's living girlfriend. And it turns out that the two gentlemen are both teachers in the same school at Harden. Well, I turned up one day to do the investigation. I got to the cottage, and there, as I approached the cottage, I could see a white piece of paper stuck on the door, and I read the paper and it said, we'll be along in a few moments. And indeed they were. Well, I was surprised. The cottage was 18th century terrace cottage. It was one up and one down, which is surprising. And so, straight off the front door into the one main lounge. I was sat in a chair looking around and so on. And I said, right, what I need to do is investigate where all this is happening. So they lead me into this tiny little kitchen. I mean, couldn't swing a cat in it really. It was 6 by 6 or 8 by 8, something like that. And I'm thinking, well, it's very unusual, but apparently the messages only come in that one area in that kitchen out of the entire house. And they start to tell me about poltergeist-like activity that's occurred there. They'd go in the kitchen and find tin cans all piled up in a neat pile. And as soon as they walk in, they would collapse. Very, very strange. But obviously there was something about this kitchen that seemed to be important to it all. So we sat down and they start to tell me the story about it all. They'd moved into this little tiny cottage, and no sooner had they moved in, but poltergeist-like activities going on all over the place. Things are not in the place they put them down. Things had moved about. And it got worse, until in the end things were really displaced. And one day, incredibly, they came back to find every single item of the lounge, that's carpets, furniture, items, ornaments, everything, was thrown up against the kitchen wall. But stranger things were to come. They decided that it was too small a place as it was, and that they would need a toilet adding to the actual house, rather than having to go up the garden. And so they'd called somebody in who was knocking this back part of the building about to create a bathroom for them, the end of the kitchen, and a toilet, which is quite sensible. Then it happened. The builder comes in one night and he says, "What on earth are you doing writing on my new floor? I've just put that floor down." I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, apparently the broken plaster off the walls have been used to draw on the floor." Mm-hmm. But not drawings or anything. Strange script. Beautiful, but strange. And words that didn't always make sense either. Well, a terrific row, and the building work continued. But it did come at an abrupt end. When the builder comes in and finds no writing on the floor, but now his new plastered wall has got script all down it. Well, obviously, it's okay to find a bit of writing on a bit of paper. When it's on your new wall, it's got to stop. So the builder used some language which I don't think is decipherable, and eventually he left, not to come back again. Ken now thinks, who is it of my friends that's coming in and doing this? It's not me or Debbie. So very few friends come in here, but somebody's doing it. So now he starts to look at and accuse almost everybody that he knew of perpetrating these things. But he doesn't get anywhere with it at all. Then he thinks, right, I'll soon find out who it is. And one of his hobbies was, he'd got this old Jaguar car that he was very fond of. So he locks all the place up completely, leaves it all set, goes outside and sits down in his Jaguar car at a distance and watches the house. I'll have him. I'll soon find out who's done this. No, he didn't. He came back to the cottage after sitting there 3.5 hours to find new writing in the locked up house. Well, I don't know what to think of it. I'm sure he didn't know what to think of it either. But nonetheless, it was happening. It was some time after this, I believe, when the BBC Micro, which was one of the very early personal computers that had come out, was issued to all schools. And Harden School had one of these. And I suppose Ken couldn't resist the opportunity to bring it home after work so that he could have a play with it. And indeed, he brought it in and he put it in the only place that had any space was the work surface in the kitchen. Well, he carried on using it for quite some time until one day they decided that it would go out, and off they went, but they'd forgotten to turn the computer off. So there, on a work surface in the kitchen, is a BBC Micro and its screen still on. They lock up, go, spend the day and come back. When they come back, they go into the kitchen and it's still on. Oh, we left the computer on. No, there's a message on the screen typed up. Well, it's a bit of a nonsense message. I'm not going to go into the details of all these messages because this really would spoil anybody's enjoyment of reading the book where it is completely detailed. But it was a nonsense message. It didn't make a lot of sense. Even less how on earth it got on there in the first place. Well, the messages continued. And it was even being signed off. LW. It turns out later that this was Lucas Wayneman, and even that wasn't his correct name, for much later on they discovered his real name was Thomas Harden. Thomas Harden was investigated and discovered to have been a historical person, which is very interesting in its own right. And so the messages continued. Eventually, a new message came. Oh, by the way, the messages are a story in their own right. Now, I'm not going to go into this at all because A, it would completely spoil anybody's appreciation of the book, where the story is in total detail. Lots of things were happening back in those 1500s, not least that he got arrested because he was seeing these messages on a box that lit up in the corner of his living room. His housekeeper thought this was some kind of magic, and she reported him to the authorities, who ultimately arrested him. When the sheriff interviewed him and discovered what was going on, and that there was this magic box of lights in the corner, which I think he called it a Leam's must. He himself was so fascinated that he had to have a go himself, and he put a message or two across on the machine and wanted it for himself. I'll end that story of Thomas or Lucas there because people should read this for themselves. It is a fascinating story in its own right, but it's not a story that has anything to do with me, truly. I came in much later, when a strange message started to appear on screen, saying basically we're responsible for all this that's going on, and we call ourselves 2109. Now, what is 2109? I looked it up, and it's a lot of peen tablets which have got 2109 printed on them and a V. But that's obviously nothing to do with it. Could it be that 2109 is the year 2109, which would put them way ahead in the future? This sounds more likely, doesn't it? Well, the messages continued now between 2109 and Ken Webster for some time. Ken Webster believing all along that all of this is a nonsense perpetrated by one of his pals or somebody else, somehow or other, which he couldn't explain. But it was happening just the same. Then, eventually, there was a message from 2109 which told them that they could get somebody in to prove to them, basically, that this was a reality and that they should pay more heed to it and concede to do what they wanted him to do in the present time. And so the message actually contained my name, as you've heard, a statement that I was mostly a UFO investigator. It's not strictly true. I'm a mysteries investigator and have been doing this all my life as it happens. But most importantly, it had my telephone number in as well, which is how I got the telephone call in the first place. Well, following the invitation to Peter's house and the visit there, I did pick a time and a date, and I did actually go to investigate the cottage itself. I was amazed how tiny it was when I got there, by the way. And I went in and we had a chat and discussed many things, but I'd taken a lot of special equipment there. And the equipment included a television camera and a television recorder. It included all sorts of electronic devices, but one in specific device was completely new. I'd had a special piece of equipment built for me which allowed me to interconnect the computer that I took, which was a Tandy TRS-80 level 2 15K, which is an incredibly low amount of memory but was pretty good for its day, and I'd taken that equipment there. The computer and the printer that was attached to it was £1,000 in those days, by the way, and it enabled me to record everything in there firsthand. So I wired the entire place up, the catches on the windows and the doors, not as there were many in there, and it was connected to the computer via this new contraption that I'd got, which every so many seconds investigated the situation of all the locks and seals and everything and reported back on their condition and against time. I was there from 4 o'clock till 10 o'clock running this. Unfortunately, despite all the technical equipment, nothing happened on that occasion, which was the butt of 2109's jokes about it at a later stage. However, it turns out that my investigation with the computer was the world's first computer-controlled psychic investigation, which I didn't realise at the time, of course. I had thought that as this was a ghost in the machine type of case, that I should use a machine rather than myself as the investigator. So throughout the entire procedure, only the equipment was doing the investigating. And even the tapes that were put into the TV recorder were sealed, and I got them to sign a certificate saying these were completely sealed and opened by them in their presence. So I conducted the best investigation that I could on that occasion. after a while, 2109 started to address me directly in messages. And though some of the preliminary stuff is mentioned in the book, eventually they asked me to only send messages to them in sealed envelopes. Sealed envelopes? How are they going to read them in sealed envelopes? No idea, but I did. And then I thought, hang on a minute, if this is a hoax, should it be? Somebody's opening these envelopes and reading my messages, because I was getting answers back.
So you were writing it on a piece of paper, putting it in an envelope and leaving it in the house?
Yes.
And then the following day, you'd go back?
I would go back and get an answer to my questions and so on. Obviously, all the time, thinking, this has to be a hoax. Somebody's behind this, and somehow or other, to be able to answer my questions, they must be opening the envelopes, despite the fact that they were specially sealed. I won't go into that, but take my word for it, being able to open that envelope and read the writing is near impossible without me knowing. However, that's the state I got them back. So I came up with a cunning plan, I thought it was anyway. I've got a complete dark room here, my home. So I went into the dark room and I got an ordinary photograph, and as you know, the old snaps, black and white, used to have a white border around the edge. So I produced one in my dark room. The only difference was that although the centre was a photograph that was already exposed, the border was unexposed photographic paper, sealed in a dark room, so no light could touch it. It was then put into a light-proof envelope with the message and handed over on the weekly visits that were taking place, and it was put where the computer is in their cottage, unopened. It was returned to me the following week with answers. I took it straight upstairs, put it into my dark room and processed the photograph I put in there, and discovered that it had not been opened in any way. No light had touched that photograph at all, and yet the message was answered. I was convinced, fairly convinced.
And you didn't tell anybody that there was photographic paper in there?
Oh no, absolutely not, obviously. So these messages continued for a while, but I had to promise that nothing in the messages would ever be revealed to anyone unless I was told to. And that's the situation as we stand today. I'm sitting on some pretty incredible stuff. I only wish that I could talk about it. But you needn't worry, because sooner or later you're going to know all about it anyway. Yes.
What happened after the initial communication and the photographic paper? What happened after that?
The communications with 2109 continued for quite a long time. Weekly we were passing information back and forth, and Ken Webster was getting more and more angry at this as it went along. After all, he was receiving messages in his house he couldn't read, and the communication with somebody he didn't know was taking place, and he was a part of it and getting nothing out of it basically. Well, after a while, 2109 had concluded everything they needed to do, and I did everything they'd asked me to do, and they said they were going to close down this experiment that they had actually set up. And so after a short while, the communication between Debbie and the past had ceased, and 2109 bid me farewell, and it ended. Now, from that day to this, I've had no communication at all with Ken, Debbie, or any of the other people involved. And I was absolutely staggered when weeks or so later I discovered that a book was being produced about it. In fact, it was somebody from London that rang me up and said, this nonsense that you were involved with, well, I had no knowledge of it whatever. So I dashed out and managed to buy a copy of the book, which is called The Vertical Plane. What I can tell you, and this has really got me going, is that these people knew all about my interest in numerology. Nobody else did, but they did.
You mean the 2109 people?
Yes. 2109 seemed to know all about my interest in numerology, which nobody else knew anything about, and indeed pointed out to me several things about my own numerology which I didn't realise. Since then it's been investigated and been found that the details of my numerology are quite unique and actually run into many, many millions to one against chance, which is phenomenal in its own right, but indicates that somebody knew everything about my numerology even before I was born. For the very year I was born adds to a 7, which is my number. My date of birth is a 7. My first name, Gary, is a 7. My middle name, Malcolm's a 7. My total name is a 7. My address is a 7. My phone number's a 7. Everything about my life of importance, good and bad, has been a 7. And even though they've gone to 2109, I still see little references that indicate to me that their hand is in the affairs of things. Not least when the book came out, which surprised me, because there's a misprint in the book. And the misprint is that there's 2 chapter 7s in the book. 7s. The second chapter 7 actually begins with 25, which is a 7. More than that, even the picture on the front of the book of a cottage has got 7 windows in it. And you may say, well, yeah, sure, that's a coincidence. Well, it must be another coincidence, because the very title, The Vertical Plane, in Chaldean numerology, is also a 7. Well, I'll leave that up to you, whether you believe any of this. I can't talk about any of the messages. I gave my word, and my word is my bond, and so you will just have to wait and see. But don't worry, I don't think you're going to be waiting long.
So have you had any more communication with Ken and Debbie
None
since
whatever.
then? None at all?
No.
And have you been back to Dodleston?
No, I haven't.
So it's a sort of case that sort of, at the time when it was over, it was over.
It was over.
And you haven't gone back to it.
That's correct, yes.
Keeps resurrecting over the interest that people are showing in the subject.
I've had enormous interests over the years about it. Even now I get 1 or 2 a week queries about it, and quite rightly so.
Can I ask, what is going on here? You've got 7 there. It's 22 is before it. I'm like, what?
So you've got chapter 22
7.
followed by chapter 7.
See, 22,
Yeah.
then it's 7. What is
So it's
going
not
on
like
there?
it's not 7 and then another 7. It's
7.
22 and then 7.
Yeah.
And you've already got another 7, obviously in order.
I take a photo of number 7 as well.
It's
so different.
I've inquired about it. It's an error. Well, I think it is. The publisher thinks it's an error.
But it's in 22, after 22, which is
But
really weird.
there's a hand in all of this, I believe. And I believe the
Yeah.
hand is showing itself a bit there.
So what are your views yourself? What's your gut feeling? Do you think 2109, we say they because they actually refer to themselves as we, do you think they are in the future, or do you think they're from somewhere else, maybe interdimensional beings sort of?
I think quite a lot, but I don't say much.
Well, what's your gut feeling that you can tell us today? Do you think?
I think I've told you everything that I can tell you today.
That's what he
Yeah.
does. He's only certain about he can tell.
Yeah,
He's told us what he can tell.
man of mystery.